Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today I have a very special guest back on for multiple times now. Again, don't even know how many at this point, but Bryan Boorstein is back on. Always fun to catch up. Him and I obviously chat at least probably two times a week, but not everybody gets to hear what we talk about. So that's why we bring you on here. Looking forward to talking to you, man, and welcome back on.
Yeah, dude, pumped to be here as always.
How's the last time we had you on? I think it was sometime in June, and that was with Jordan. And we touched base on your training and stuff, but we don't really get too in depth with it then. How's everything been going for you the last couple months? I know you had an injury and stuff. Yeah, man. Curious to hear how things are going there.
Yeah, training's actually going extremely well. Really better than I even could have hoped for this season. I have been able to maintain or even increase my body weight through this period of time where I'm focusing my 1A objective on biking and my 1B objective being lifting. And last year when I did this, I lost weight. I just precipitous weight loss from the beginning, from about mid 190s to low 180s over the course of 5 or 6 months biking. This time I've gone from mid 190s where I started same place as last time. And now I'm 198. I've managed to gain weight throughout this bike season, and it's been insanely productive for both pursuits. I think there's a perception that being lighter is better for biking or running, definitely for running, but for biking as well. And I'm under that belief for the most part. I do think if you can maintain strength, having less body fat is good. But for what I'm doing, trying to do these hybrid pursuits of both, I think there's a ton of value in making sure that you're well fed and not in a caloric deficit where you're not going to be performing optimally in either of your pursuits. By being able to maintain body weight throughout this period of time, I've actually seen PRs in the gym. I've seen PRs in my biking, doing routes and segments that are way faster than last year. And I think a lot of it has to do with just having a better grasp on the split of how I'm going to go about the number of sessions per week for biking and for lifting. Lessons learned from last year, really, where last year it took me until almost mid-August before I finally was like, wow, I can't keep lifting 4 or 5 days a week and biking 5+ days a week. As soon as I made that switch back then, everything got better. And so this season in March, starting out, the first thing I did was drop lifting to 5 lift sessions over 2 weeks. So basically like 2.5 lift sessions a week, and ramped the cardio up to 5 or 6 times a week. And through this low volume, low frequency approach to lifting, I've really been able to, I think, maximize my results on the bike, but also surprisingly actually increase some performance on a number of my lifting movements as well. So overall, super positive.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I know that was something you said you really wanted to work on this period of time when you were focused on both. Like you said, you did too much last time. So it was learning that, obviously finding a good kind of happy medium with those two. But you also mentioned the nutrition side of things in terms of seeing your body weight trend up. Is that just you just focusing on eating more regularly? Was there anything special you did there?
Yeah, I really just have to focus on eating more food, especially earlier in the day. Because I usually, like, I think last year, what I did was I just went with my normal pattern of kind of just grazing throughout the day for the most part, no real substantial meals. And then I would just pound a ton of food at night, like 1,500 calories for dinner and beyond. And this year, I'm doing the 1,500 calories dinner and beyond, but I'm also making sure to have a robust lunch that's 800 to 1,000 calories, and then also snacks and grazing throughout the day. Yeah, I think that I'm doing a much better job of just staying on top of my nutrition. And so, yeah, it's been super positive there.
Yeah, so just really making sure you eat enough, which I think for some people that's wait, how is that really actually a thing? But when you're doing as much probably movement as you are, it's probably easy to not get in as much food in as you typically or what you need for the amount of energy expenditure that you have.
Yeah, I would say at this point, based on at least what my Apple Watch is telling me, on a low activity day, I'm still burning about 1,000 active calories a day. And then on a high activity day, I could be like 1,800, 2,000, something like that. And then that's obviously above and beyond BMR.
When you're with your nutrition, sorry, our doorbell just rang, but luckily the dog's not barking. With your nutrition, is it like focusing on like whole foods? Or is it just like you're just trying to get the calories in, or like what's your kind of method around that?
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to do it if I was eating like super high quality food the whole time. I think I may have mentioned it on the show prior, but I bake a lot, like 3 times a
Sorry.
week, 2 to 3 times a week. I like to bake brownies, cakes, cookies, whatever. And I'll usually eat half a batch in a sitting, which is 1,000-ish, 1,200 calorie bolus of not quality calories. But I'll do that like a couple times a week. And that seems to help provide me joy and pleasure, but also to fill the need for the calories in like kind of an easy way. And then I'll usually do pizza once a week, get like a foot long cheesesteak or something like that. It's certainly not all clean calories, but I would say each day, if I'm eating 3 times a day, like at least two of those feedings are clean.
What would you say your calories are at in a day? Can you hear
I'd
me?
say,
Oh,
yeah. I'm just thinking. I would say it's somewhere between 3,500 and 4,000, depending on the day. Yeah, in that range. Sometimes a little above, sometimes a little below.
just the reason I ask is just because I think I had a poll like a couple weeks ago about the this Olympic. I think he was like a shot putter, and this dude was like probably 300 pounds, pretty big.
Yeah.
He obviously had some body fat, and I'm just always curious to think how many calories. Somebody, I think it was my brother, brought it up to me. He's like, "How many calories do you think he ate?" And I'm like, I don't really know what the training looks like for that, but I just feel like sometimes people think maybe people's calories are a lot higher, and it's like really hard to one sustain. Like I mean, it's hard to eat that many calories. I feel like week over week. So I'm just always curious to hear how many calories you think you eat. And I feel like it always ends up being maybe a little bit less than what people would think there.
Yeah, I'm doing a ton of activity and like 4,000 calories is a lot of food. Like I have to put the effort in to eat it for the most part. Yeah, people that cheat days and they're like, "Yeah, I had 6,000 calories or something." Maybe they did, but that is a ton of food. Like I can have 4,000 calories and there's like a big cheat in there. So that means that to have 6,000, you got to have like 3 or 4 cheats in there.
Yeah, you pretty much have to have some calorie dense foods in there for sure. Otherwise, it's just going
Yeah.
to be super hard. I had some clients that be like, "Oh, I could easily eat that." I'm like, I think you're underestimating you eating, say, 2,500 most of the week, or you're in a
Yeah.
deficit. And yeah, I'm sure one day you could eat 6 to 10,000 calories, but if you had to do that regularly, that's really hard to do. And I
Hmm.
think there is a point probably where you can't eat any more calories, even if you
Yeah.
do like a ton of.
For sure. Yeah. I'm just thinking back to a couple of years ago when we went to Outback and we started with the bloomin' onion and that thing's 2,000 calories or something like that. And I think I ate 3/4 of it. And then it was like a steak, like 4 loaves of that brown bread with smothered in butter and then fries on the side. And that meal itself must have been close to 4,000 calories. And I was not hungry for 24 hours. I literally
Yep.
woke up the next day and I was like, I can't even think about eating right now.
Yep. Yeah, no, I think, yeah, I just think it's really hard to do. People underestimate how hard that actually is to do that. Just out of curiosity, do you remember that poll that I put up by chance?
I
Do you
do.
remember
Yeah. Yeah.
how many calories do you think that guy actually
He's
consumed?
300 pounds and he's training as a strength athlete, more or
Yeah.
less. So the thing that makes the biggest difference is the 300 pounds. Like his training isn't going to burn like an extreme number of calories, but being 300 pounds is really big. Think of the difference between someone that's 100 pounds, 200 pounds, and 300 pounds. And I feel like the calorie intake goes up exponentially. Like for me, my with no activity is like 2,300, 2,400, something like that. And so his BMR must be 3,600, 3,700, something like that. And then he needs to feed any of his activity with calories as well. So then it's just a matter of what is his activity. And if you assume that he's moving a decent amount, maybe he's moving 1,500 calories a day and he needs to replace that to maintain body weight. So maybe 5,000 calories, something like that. I think that's
Yep.
reasonable.
Yeah, that's around the number that I was thinking because I just didn't think that like a shot putter would have that. I think that's what he did. I just wouldn't imagine their training is like a ton of like movement throughout the day. Like you said, it's more like strength based, which isn't going to necessarily add a ton of energy expenditure to the day. So always fun to do those things and think about how many calories they have to eat. What about for your injury, man? How was you had that kind of scary incident? How's everything going there with that?
Yeah, I had a bike crash. I got a concussion. Everything's fine. The tussive symptoms were basically fully better by 3 days later or so. Maybe not fully better in that I wouldn't have felt comfortable going for a run because of the bouncing up and down. Like I could feel that in my head. But as far as like biking and lifting and stuff like that, like I was able to do all of that as normal day 3. And then it just improved from there. And then the other injuries I sustained, I got a bunch of glass that cut my neck. And so I don't know if you can see that in the
Yeah.
camera, but it's still pretty jacked
Dang.
up there. It's more like scar tissue now. Like I think I need to get someone to grind it out and release the scar tissue or something because it's just not at this point getting better, but it doesn't hurt. And then my worst injury was on my elbow. I think my right elbow took the brunt of my fall and it had glass lodged in it and I got a bunch of stitches in my elbow, but it is still slightly, I don't want to say swollen, but it has fluid in it. There's definitely some fluid retention in the elbow right now. And It hurts if I try to like put all my pressure on it. Like if I'm going to lean over to my right side on my elbow, like I can't do that yet. So I don't know. Maybe that will never get better and I'll just have a bum elbow forever, or maybe it will just continue to gradually get better over time.
Yeah, man. You said the worst injuries were like you said your elbow, but man, head injuries that's definitely something you don't want to mess
For
around
sure.
with.
Yeah. I'm talking about the physical injuries. I think
Yeah,
the concussion is by far the worst
I see.
injury. Yeah, for sure.
Did you have any symptoms a couple days after and stuff like that?
The day after I drove my son to school and then threw up, like literally walking him to
Oh
school, I was like,
wow.
or into camp rather. I was like, oh, I'm starting to feel this like weird watery taste in my mouth. And then
Wow.
I threw up all over, went back home and realized that I wasn't really okay. And I laid down in bed and slept until 3 p.m., or it was in bed till 3 p.m. So that was like 8 hours of sleep after the prior night of sleep. And then after that, the next day I woke up and I would say I felt 80 or 90% better. And then by day three, like I said, I felt mostly completely better. The recovery curve was pretty fast the first day after, obviously being pretty bad.
And then training wise, just ease back into the intensity and stuff like that for the first week or
Yeah, so on day three, when I started feeling better, or day two, I went for a really long walk. Day three, I did zone two cardio, just an easy, super easy bike ride for like an hour. And then day four, I lifted and didn't go to failure or anything, but did some big compound movements to just move around and get some blood flow. And then after day four, I was basically back to normal scheduling. I would go out and bike and lift and regular intensity and everything.
man, yeah, that's super scary. Glad seems like you recovered pretty quickly, so that's awesome. Definitely throwing up and stuff too. That's pretty scary. That would have gotten me freaked out afterwards like that. But it sounds like everything's pretty much back on track from the concussion side of things. So feeling better there. So that's great. From a training perspective, man, is there anything that you're digging right now in terms of any movements that you're doing from a hypertrophy perspective or anything like that?
One of the things I'm really liking is doing lower rep sets of RDLs and squat pattern movements. And so I've been doing like 5 by 3 on one of the days, probably with a 7 RM or something like that. So the first set is maybe a 3 or 4 RIR, and then the last set gets pretty hard. So I've been doing that for pendulum. And then on my hack squat, I've been doing build up to one top set of 3 to 5. And that's been progressing surprisingly well as well. Those two have been super cool. I just have always in my heart been a low rep guy, especially for legs. Like I always feel like the burn in the legs makes me stop shy of where I really should. Or maybe just it just burns so much that I don't enjoy it. It's one of those two or like a combination of them both. But I do enjoy doing like low rep work where you're like, hey, I'm buckling in for a really short but hard set here, 100-meter sprint versus a 200 or a 400 or something like that. And that just like that style of leg training really speaks to me. I don't think it's necessarily optimal for hypertrophy, but I think that it's accumulating volume in a manner that is enjoyable for me. And at this point, I don't think that there's a ton of hypertrophy to be had anyway. And man, if 5 sets of 3 at an RPE 6 to 8 on pendulum can't get me there, then I don't know. Like based on the research, I would believe that it's about the fact that I accumulated like 15 quality reps that were all effective. And if you could do 3 sets of 12 or something like that to failure, you would also get 15 quality reps. So I don't think there's like a lot lost in that trade.
Yeah, and I think based on the research too, in terms of RAR, it seems like one lower body training is a little bit tougher to get to failure, but then obviously the higher you go with the reps, the harder it is. And like you said, is it you just don't enjoy it? I mean, that there's probably all those things that go into it and why most people can't. And it's just hard. And then on top of it, you have that burn, so you end up being a little bit further away from failure, probably on the lower body stuff like that. In line with what the research says there with that, and
Yeah.
just higher reps in general, which I've told you definitely was ready to do maybe some lower rep stuff and definitely enjoying that. I've gone back and forth on it. Sometimes I like higher reps. I think this is where I think in the research, there's nothing that shows, oh, hey, periodizing your training is going to be good for hypertrophy. But I do think that there's this kind of psychological side of things that it can be beneficial where it keeps things, it just changes it up a little bit and you can work in and out of that range. And I think that's something that can't be ignored from that perspective.
For sure. I find the same every, call it 3 to 6 months of lower rep hypertrophy training. I get the itch to go experience that like higher rep burn again. And then I'll do that for 2 to 4 weeks. And it's super enjoyable because the stimulus is so good. It's like you've been priming your body with all this low rep work and not doing the high rep stuff that when you go and you do a set of 15, it's like, oh my God, I feel like more blown up and more of a pump than I've felt in so long. And they're just like, in some way, I just think there has to be something productive about that. Like the novelty for sure. Like the data driven guys seem to be focusing on this idea of novelty being a thing. And so that seems to be in line with my natural tendency, which is every few months, let's jump into a few weeks of higher rep work, metabolite buildup, and then get back into kind of regular business as usual.
Yeah, there it's like they're talking there might be some like physiological benefit of doing this. Then also I think even if there's not, I think there's something for the psychological side of things to keep it fresh and keep your training engaging and because I think when it is engaging like that, you're able to push it a little bit more. And that's obviously going to be great from a long-term adherence. And obviously that's the biggest thing that we need from a hypertrophy standpoint. What about lying lateral raises? Is that something that you put in my program? And I know you're doing them. What was your rationale? I guess, was there anything special with them or is it just a form of variation?
Yeah, I'd call it just a form of variation where you can really work the muscle to fatigue without worrying about compensations that usually would occur with a different setup. I know from the education we've had at N1 that this is not something that Cass is a huge fan of. He talks about trapping the scapula when you lay on it. And so his preference is to chest support instead of back support a movement like that. And I've done them chest supported, and that's great as well. Like standing up with my chest prone against a steep incline bench. Those work super well as well. I think there's something really comfortable about being able to lay down while you're doing it to focus exclusively on what the delts are doing. And then the little princess trick, as Jordan Lips calls it, where you pop up the what usually is the butt rest and you pop it up and incline it a little so that you have a nice sweet headrest for yourself. Huge fan of that. It really just everything in that movement just feels so good. And like I have you doing it lengthened where you set it up so that the cables are basically forming a perpendicular angle with your forearm as the arms are outstretched in front of you. And so in many ways, it's actually like a Y raise. Like I think the actual movement setup and execution actually resembles more of a Y raise than a lateral raise in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So they're like similar, but different, like very slightly different. But yeah, I'm a huge fan of it. What do you think?
Yeah, I've only done it once. It felt good. I think for me, it's going to be getting the setup down, which was a question I had for you. So I'm using a functional trainer. What would be ideally the best place to set up the handles at there for that?
Yeah, so I have them set up maybe 6 inches or so, 6 to 8 inches above where the top of my hips are, like as I'm
Okay.
lying down. So, like when you're doing a Y raise, you tend to finish in front of your body
Yeah.
instead of like directly next to your body. And so I feel like by putting them a little bit higher above your torso, you're able to facilitate a little bit more of that, where the angle of the movement comes from like high to low as you're doing it instead of just strictly out. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So basically, it would be better to have it higher, have them set up a little bit above your torso versus lower than your torso, like underneath
I
you.
definitely wouldn't put it under the
Yeah.
torso, but I think you have varying degrees of effectiveness in the ranges above the torso.
Because when I tried to do it below, because like I went off the video and it looked like had it maybe set up a little bit lower initially. I could have totally got that wrong. And so I tried it that way and it felt okay, but it was like getting in the way. It was just the cables were getting in the way. So I'm definitely going to alter that today when I go and do them and have it set up a little bit higher. And I'm sure they'll feel even better than they did last
Yes,
week.
sweet. I'll have to check that video and make sure that it doesn't look wrong because I feel like you actually can't do the movement if the cables are too low. Like it would would actually obstruct itself.
Right. And they were getting in the way. So it was challenging.
Yeah,
So I could have totally misdone the video side of things. So I'm gonna
cool.
have to raise it up a little bit and give that a shot. So, but
Yep.
yeah, no, I like it. It's interesting. I haven't done anything like that. I'm usually just done the lateral raises standing up. So it'll be cool to progress this and feel the difference there. So
Sweet.
so a selfish question for me on the home gym stuff. So have that going. Well, you and I have been going back and forth, but it's going to be coming soon. So now I'm like, all right, so what are, home gym equipment's freaking expensive, right? And it can add up quickly. It's hard to get everything at one time. And so I think
Yeah.
starting out, it freaking sucks. So I'm trying to get my order of importance here of, all right, so the Prime Prodigy rack is coming in hopefully the next couple weeks, but it's all right. From there, I have nothing. So it's what are my kind of like areas of importance? And so this is what I have. So I'm curious to hear what you think here, but I know we've briefly touched on this, but I'm not going to be able to get everything at one time. So the first thing I have, so we do have an adjustable bench that we're going to be able to have, which is going to be super versatile. But I was thinking dumbbells, like some sort of adjustable dumbbells would probably have to be high up on that priority list, right?
Do you have a barbell already?
No barbell.
then how are you going to train your lower body effectively? Like dumbbells up to 80 pounds aren't going to be enough for you, right?
Yeah, correct. Yep.
So I think a barbell and some plates has to be like first priority.
Okay. And again, the main reason kind of being the lower body training side of things if I'm just
Yeah.
training at home.
Yeah, exactly. If you're just training at home, like if you're going to just stick with dumbbells and train your lower body, then you have to essentially do split squats, lunges, and single leg RDLs as your only lower body movements. Like, I know single leg stuff we've talked about how annoying it is to have to go to close to failure on each leg and how tiring and fatiguing that is. And I also just think that even with single leg movements, you're going to be too strong for the 80s. I can split squat and single leg RDL the 110s. I'm pretty sure you would outgrow the 80s pretty quickly or be doing sets of 15, which is just as miserable.
Yeah. Yeah. Any like single leg, like RD, that just sounds freaking awful to have to do that. Yeah. So that makes sense. So barbell, some weights,
Yeah.
probably would be high. And again, the main reason being, hey, you can add in a ton of lower body training
Yeah.
with doing that.
Yep. Yep. And then I would say it's close. It depends on your why, but I would almost put like leg extension, leg curl machine ahead of getting dumbbells because with the cable machine, you can do everything that you would be using the dumbbells for,
Okay.
unless you can think of some reason that the dumbbells feel like a necessity.
No, you're 100% right. Really, that's again, the cable stack can do a ton. And plus, adjustable dumbbells aren't exactly the cheapest either as well. So
Right.
yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense there because again, that's the cool thing with the cable stack is you're able to you can do a ton of different exercises with that and
Yeah.
setups and everything. Some other things I had on here, like mats, this is going to be in a garage. So I'm assuming those are probably something that you would think would be super important to
Yeah,
get.
horse stall mats are what you want. They are about $50 and you'll want them to be about 3/4 of an inch so that they absorb plates when you drop them or whatever, if you're doing RDLs or deadlifts or something like that.
Yeah.
You could probably get away with half an inch thick, actually, since you're doing mostly bodybuilding training.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, that's it. What do you got?
Do you have that in the basement?
Yeah, so
Deadlifts?
those are what we've used I've built 5 gyms, 6 gyms, including my home gym over the course of starting my gym in 2000, moving locations a few times, etc. And we always use these horse stall mats. They're super effective. They're great. You can clean them easily. And the real only downside is that if you have to fit them into corners or like into spaces, like they come in 4x6, so you have to cut them yourself with an X-Acto knife. And I can't exactly understand why technology hasn't figured out a better way to cut horse stall mats, but we're in like the year 2024, and I'm pretty sure that's still the best way.
So this might be a dumb question, but for Prime Prodigy Rack, and again, obviously we'll add things like leg extension and stuff like that later. What do we look? Is that like 4 of those probably you think, or if you don't know, that's okay. I'm just more so curious. This is something
How
I've
big
done
is your
there.
garage? Are you going to use all of it for equipment eventually?
No, not all of it. Just probably like one. Like it's a 3-car garage, so then there's like the one kind of side there that is a
Yeah.
single one that will probably be more of the gym type stuff.
Yeah, I would just mat out the entire
Yeah.
single side
Okay.
from wall to wall.
Yeah.
Because otherwise they're going to slide around and move. So you want them to be like snug, nice and tight.
I didn't even think of that. Okay, cool. Again, this is why I'm asking you these things. So that's good to know. And then I also have on here the lat pull down seat. Obviously, I'm going to get wedges and handles because I think those are important. And then I also had the long bar in there.
Yeah.
Those are my like high, like priority stuff if I'm just thinking here. So really, it seems like for you, the big thing you would change is the barbell and the weights over the dumbbells essentially is the biggest thing that you
Yeah, and then you're just going to need a way to weigh down your bench. If you don't have dumbbells, then you can use plates when they come.
Yeah.
Because if you're going to RDL, you're going to think you need at least 315 pounds of weight, probably. So you can use 45s to weigh down your bench for when we're doing like lat pull down movements or single arm stuff where the bench would tend to move. Weighing down the bench is key. And you'll also need you'll also need one of those seat belts that I have so that you can lock yourself down if you don't get the thigh pads for the lat pull down soon enough or whatever.
Yeah, and that's why I have that lat pull down seat like high on the priority list because I think that's super important.
Yeah, I think by doing that, you actually save a lot of the hassle that I just mentioned. So maybe just prioritize the lat pull down attachment, thigh pad thing, and then you don't even have to worry about like weighting the bench down or anything like that.
I figured I was going to have to do that anyways at some point with some of the cable movements. I figured I was
Yeah,
probably going to have to weigh it down with the weights and stuff like that.
depending on what we do for sure.
Yeah. And then the long bar, I would imagine that's probably pretty versatile as well, too, if I get the long bar from Prime, because then you can use the different
Yeah.
lengths.
I honestly tend to not use it nearly as much as I thought I would.
Yeah.
to the point that I actually don't think I've used it a single time in like the last 6 months because the top pulley is about shoulder width, which is perfect for me without any modifications. And the bottom pulley is also shoulder width. And then I have the two side pulleys if I want to do abducted stuff away from the body. And so the only time that I ever find myself using the long bar is when I want to do rows where the angle is not one that already exists with the high pulley or the low pulley. So if I have the high pulley, it becomes like a lat pull down. And if I use the low pulley, it becomes like an upper back row. But if I want like a horizontal one, then yeah, I have to use the long bar and then connect the two wide pulleys together. I think the Prime Prodigy rack has the high pulley and low pulleys on it as well, right?
It has the lat pull down pulley up top, and then it
Yeah.
has the one where you can move it up and down throughout.
The middle, it's in the middle though, or is it? You're talking about on the sides? Because I think it has a low row as well. Does it not have like cables at the bottom to use as a low row?
I don't think so. I think it just has the
Okay,
ones on the sides
got it.
where you can put them as high or as low as you want.
Interesting. Okay, then maybe you will use the long bar a lot more because
Okay.
my the way mine is set up is I have the two arms on either side that move up and down, but then I also have in the middle I have a high pulley and I have a low pulley with two cables on each one.
Okay. Yeah. So from my understanding, this has it where it's got the rack, and on each side you can put the cables up or as high or as low as you
Yeah,
want.
yeah. Okay.
And then there's a one that comes over top that is for the lat pull.
Got it. Yeah, that's definitely not okay. That's not quite as effective. You will definitely use the long bar then.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just gonna look this up just because I'm curious now. G-Rack.
I just want to, I could be getting it wrong too, but I'm pretty sure that's,
Yeah, I think you're right. It doesn't look like there's a high pulley or a low pulley in the middle. There's just the two arms that slide up and down. Okay.
yep.
You're right. Yeah, you'll need the long bar then.
Okay. Those were honestly my main things. Was there anything else that like some, obviously, like I said, over time, I want to get the leg curl, leg extension, the
Yeah.
hack squat, those dumbbells over time. But is there anything else you can think of?
45-degree hip extension over time.
45. Yeah. Yes.
I would say what's interesting is that I think once you get a squat machine, it almost makes the barbell useless in a sense. Like not useless, but you could get away without using a barbell if you get the squat machine. You know what I mean?
So it's a weird.
So yeah, I almost wonder because the barbell and weights might be like a similar cost to a squat machine. And so yeah, the issue is then what do you do for RDLs?
Yep.
Because
right.
so you could get like a trap bar and weights, but then you're in the same situation as like, why don't the barbell's more versatile? It's tough, dude. It's tough because like literally when I look at the way that I program and the way that I think you align with training for the most part, the only barbell we really use is in the RDL. And so it seems silly to spend all that money and stuff for the barbell, but then it's if you want to RDL, you need to.
Yep. Yep.
Or do you get the 45-degree hip extension and then you have leg curl, 45-degree hip extension, and then you don't do an RDL unless it's like a single leg dumbbell RDL. It just is, it gets complicated.
Yep.
And it's best to have everything, but you like can't have everything. And then order of operations make it more complicated as well.
And it really, at the end of the day, it's a kind of order of operations type thing. That's where I was like, all right, so after the Prime Prodigy rack, it's like, all right, is it barbell? Is it dumbbells? And you're saying you're obviously making a case for even potentially leg extension or the hack squat sled as well too. Yeah.
It's like, you can't go wrong. Like after the Prime
Yeah.
Prodigy rack, you could take it any
Right.
direction and no matter what, eventually you end up with everything and it's
Yeah.
all good.
Yep. It's just like, all right, but again, like you said, it's also, hey, can you go to a gym once a week and get some leg? These are all things that obviously are going to impact that. What about, so again, I think from a like equipment perspective, I think you have a pretty good idea there. What about from like small things like a fan and like space heater, dehumidifier? Like how important are those things? And you said you've had 5 places that you've built gyms at. And so like how important do you think those things are, especially like being in a garage?
It depends what your environment is.
Yeah.
My gym is in my basement, so it's not subject to the same levels of cold and hot that the outside or garage would experience. But yeah, the gyms I've built were all in San Diego and it's temperate and it's always beautiful.
Nice
So
weather.
like literally none of those things have been a concern for me ever. So I'm probably not like the right guy to ask about it. I think you have to base it on your environment and what you experience. I know the people in my Facebook group for Paragon are always asking about fans, especially the people in Houston and New Orleans and stuff like that, like always asking about fans. Yeah, it just depends on your environment.
Yep. Unfortunately, here in St. Louis, Missouri, we get all the seasons. So it's like you can't really just have one. You got to have them all. Cool. Any other like tips or anything that you would say with getting started here with this or anything like that?
No, it's just super exciting. Like I remember those feelings of excitement to train and
Yep.
everything when first building it. And then it almost is like what people say is like tattoos where you get one and then you want more. And I feel like building a home gym is very similar.
I already can tell that, dude. My only concern with all this, obviously the price of everything is, but my other concern is like now it's like I work from home. It's like everything I'm just going to be doing from home. So that's like my biggest thing. But I'm sure
Yeah.
again, the convenience is going to be so nice because I feel rushed sometimes because we got to get to I don't, we just place these kind of constraints on ourselves. And so it'd be nice to be able to get some workouts in more efficiently and not have to worry about leaving. And then obviously with the baby and stuff like that.
Yeah. Also, like you can split sessions up too, which is
yeah.
like really the best part.
Yep. Which will be really, yeah, that will be really cool because you can't really do that when you have to go. Like for me, the gym that I go to is 20 minutes away, right? So that's 40 minutes of drive. That's a pretty good chunk of time right there just for the gym. So it's like,
for sure.
Yeah. But yeah, the like you said, the tattoo thing, Allie was like, she actually was the one that kind of pushed me to get this. And then now it's like now that I'm like telling her all this other stuff, I thought it was just gonna be this thing. I'm like,
the rest of our life, baby.
Yep. But yeah, like you said, super exciting. So cool, man. So yeah, let's dive into a few hypertrophy topics here that I want to talk about. So the first is I want to hear your view on frequency for hypertrophy. I know that you and I went back, we had a conversation about a post from somebody I think this was probably about a month ago now. And so I feel like now it's here back and forth. I'm like, frequency, it's, it doesn't matter. It does matter. It doesn't matter so long as like volume's there. So like, where are you at with that? What's your view on frequency for hypertrophy?
Yeah, I think the logical brain would say that if you're going to do 10 sets a week for a muscle group, that doing 5 twice a week is probably better than doing 10 once a week, just because of the fatigue that you would experience later in the session. I don't know if I feel like splitting that up even further into 3 to 4 sets per session, 3 times a week would be even better. I don't feel super confident about that. I think so much of that depends on exercise selection, proximity to failure. Doing an RDL and trying to do hamstrings again 2 days later is way different than doing a leg curl and then doing hamstrings again 2 days later. Same thing with chest flies with a dumbbell and trying to do chest again 2 days later versus cable crossovers or something along those lines. There's just different damage associated. So to put out a blanket recommendation and say that frequency is always better at higher frequency, I don't believe that to be true. The post that you and I were discussing has this tagline, this motto around it that doing 3 sets once a week will just be maintenance, but doing 1 set 3 times a week can be progressive. And I feel like that's a little too myopic for me and doesn't talk about a lot of these kind of other extenuating circumstances that go into the milieu of creating a hypertrophy stimulus. Yeah, I guess if I was pushed, I'd say 1 set 3 times a week is probably better than 3 sets once a week, but we're talking about such low volumes there. I wouldn't say that 9 sets or 3 sets 3 times a week is necessarily better than 9 sets once a week. Maybe it is. I do feel like I said in the beginning, though, that twice a week is probably like a pretty sweet spot for frequency per muscle group.
Yeah, that to me, that's the safe that's like the sweet spot, right? Like from there, you can go off of that in terms of maybe certain muscle groups you might need to train a little bit more or whatever, or a little bit less. For example, in my situation, it's like, hey, legs, maybe that's just once a week and you go from there. But 2, like you said, that sweet spot. So what was the rationale in that post? So again, it was like you said, so once a week training 3 sets is just maintenance, but then you do it 3 times a week for 1 set. What was the rationale? Like you're just able to put a little bit more into that set or like what's...
Yeah, they also, the promoter of that post also has this idea that the science apparently shows that muscle atrophy begins before 72 hours, like 48 hours after training a muscle for anyone that's trained. And the idea being that if you wait longer than 48 hours to train a muscle group again, you're already going into atrophy because protein synthesis has subsided or whatever. So I think that was a lot of the rationale associated with it, was signaling through these different avenues.
And is he just saying that he does as little as 3 sets per week, or is that just more of just a way to just explain his kind of rationale on it?
No, I think when you actually look at some of the training that he's putting out now, he trains exclusively full body 3 times a week. And he really will sometimes hit just 1 set per muscle group in a session. So he might just do 1 exercise for his back and 1 set for his back. And then maybe another day might have 2 sets. But yeah, that's the operating approach. Everything's basically to failure or 1 rep from failure. And it's essentially full body 3 times a week with that approach.
And I'm assuming probably working up to that one set though.
Yeah,
Gives you
obviously
more reps.
this is like the old thing with Dorian. Everyone thought Dorian used these low volumes because he was like one top set per muscle group. But when you look at his actual build up to his top set, like he's still benching 364 as a warm up set, which you would think is like still an effective set if you're doing
Right.
405 for 5 as your top set. Like 365 for 4 is still some decent work in there. And then obviously there's some higher rep sets as you get acclimated in the beginning, further from failure. So yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of building up to it. Like in reality, like I sometimes feel when I do a movement, like one that really requires a lot of buildup, I usually program 2 sets for myself. But there's many times that I will do one set and feel as if, man, I did what I needed to do here. I don't know if I need this second set, but I always do it because it's on my program and I feel like I would be shortchanging myself in some way.
I know that
But
feeling.
I'm intrigued by this in the sense that I got my start in training a long time ago by training 2 to 3 times a week full body. And so there's a romanticism of the past that kind of comes into play here, a nostalgia of sorts. And there's, I think, like it's something I'm going to try and experiment with once bike season is over. I think I'm probably going to go to 3 times a week full body with a similar approach, 1 to 2 top sets per muscle group per day. Probably each session has a total of 10 sets plus or minus across the whole body. And then do that 3 times a week and just see what happens. I'm at this point where I enjoy these kind of experiments. And I think it'd be a cool thing for me to do and learn from, and also for people to follow along that are intrigued by it.
I may have missed what you said there, but so would this be something like if you did theoretically try this out, you would do literally like a quad movement, a hamstring movement, back movement, bicep, tricep movement, like you would hit every muscle group, one exercise per muscle group or not?
Yeah. So my idea is that I'd probably only do arms twice a week instead of all 3 times because and I would put like the more arm dominant back and chest movements on the other day. So the arms are getting trained auxiliary at that point. But yeah, I think my idea is that I would have about 6 exercises. So part like A through F, and each exercise would target a different muscle group.
This sounds the kind of like that kind of lower, it sounds almost like the kind of hit like Mike Menser style as well too, where you just work up to that one like big set. I don't know exactly what his kind of programming looked like, but
Yeah, there's definitely an influence of that in it. Hit, so to speak, was like
HIT.
the HIT, not HIT. HIT was the way that I got first introduced into training. It was through a forum called Hard Gainer, and they followed a hit approach, which was 2 to 3 times a week full body. Not hit in the sense that it was always one set to failure. Like they were also big proponents of 5x5 or 5x3 or 3x5 or any of that sort of stuff. It wasn't quite as myopic as just one set to failure on everything, but that was definitely where the influence came from.
I just always, when somebody really just tries to say this is the best way or this is like the only way, I just am like, is that, you know what I mean? I don't know. I'm always questioning that. And I feel like that kind of tends to be this person's approach to things. It's like, this is the best way. And this is like the only way, when it's like, again, maybe that's what has worked best for you. So it's just, can you say that for everybody? I don't know if that makes sense what I'm trying to say there, but
yeah, for sure it does. And also the fact that everyone responds to things differently. Like this post author may be somebody who's extremely fast twitch and more or less can get an extremely good stimulus from one set of a movement to failure. I know plenty of people training age that's much lower that cannot even go there to get the stimulus that they need from one set. So trying to program them a program like that, it just would be futile and would produce no results.
yeah. So again, like you said, it's worth trying, see if you like it. And then, but again, I think from a hypertrophy perspective, again, we obviously want to follow principles. It does seem like we do have different methods that we can do to get there. You obviously want to train hard. There's certain things that are consistent, but it seems like within that, you have a little bit of wiggle room there in terms of, again, your preference and maybe what you respond to best. So
for sure.
All right. So next thing I wanted to talk about was Cass had a post on what to focus on in your length and partials. I thought that was super interesting. Is there any kind of tips or anything that you would give somebody here with that? I thought that was an interesting post. And I feel like I already was doing that with my length and partials, but again, I feel like it helped me out there. So I don't know if there's any thoughts you had on that or anything like that.
Yeah, Cass is big on this idea of when you're doing your length and partial, not trying to fight through the sticking point and just really pushing or pulling as hard as you can to the sticking point and then quick release and then go back into that lengthened position and then punch out or pull in like real quick, almost like a pulsing movement where as soon as you hit that soft stop, you don't try to fight through it. You just hit and release. And I think his rationale there is that there's a lot of fatigue that accumulates through you trying to fight through that sticking point that you're not going to get through anyways. And you're not gaining a ton of stimulus there because the short position of the movement isn't going to be where the majority of the goods are anyways. So hit that thing, release, and then get back into that lengthen position quickly. I think that's a pretty effective way to go about approaching your lengthen partials.
So would that kind of look like you're like forcefully trying to push out? So for example, let's say you're doing like a lat pull down, right? Is that you forcefully pulling down and just getting to where you can instead of trying to get to a certain like point that you're trying to get to? It's more so just, hey, you're pulling that thing down and it ends up where it ends up essentially.
Yeah. And then once you feel it stop, you're not trying to fight through that to keep pulling on it to be like, I need to hit an inch more or whatever. It's just like, hey, wherever that is.
So would that kind of change your kind of how you program of, hey, hit 60 to 70% more so, hey, just get to where you can on this essentially versus trying to get to 60, 70% range of motion, something like it. Because I know like in the past we programmed that where it's like, hey, hit 60, 70% of this range of motion.
That's when we're doing a whole set that's partials.
Okay.
So at that point, we're able to pull to 100%, but we're stopping at 60 to 70% for the earlier reps. So I wouldn't say that's too similar. I think this is more relevant for when we go into partials after failure.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes sense. So again, different. And hey, this is all, I feel like this is where there is a lot of confusion around length and partials and training in the lengthened position, right? Where it's like, everyone kind of lumps this all together, but they are slightly different in terms of what you want to call them and everything like that, right? Like training in the lengthened position isn't necessarily lengthened partial. So I think differentiating these is super important.
Totally. Yeah. The vernacular is getting super complicated. And then Milo Wolf is trying to name things like lengthened supersets. And it's confusing everybody. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, there's definitely a communication barrier when it comes to some of this stuff.
And this is where I see this all the time in other things too, where it's just, you have to, I think when you like call something, whatever, you need to explain what you're talking about because what one person might mean by it, it might be something completely different. So like explaining what you mean by it first before going into it, I think is super important. So like, for example, just one that like, just to give you an example would be like mini cuts, right? It's like people mini cut sounds like it's a mini cut, but it's like, it can mean, I feel like different things for different people in terms of what the goals are and stuff. So that's one there. Cool. Were you able to listen to the data-driven strength podcast
on failure? Yeah, I did. Yeah.
What were your thoughts on that? Is there any kind of takeaways? I can tell you what I thought my takeaways were, but I want you to start and then see if they line.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think I agree almost completely with them and their takeaways. So that's the way that I think about it too. They use the drop set research to talk about it. And I feel like rest pause is probably a little bit more equivalent than drop set because drop set is complicated by the fact that there's more lactate buildup through higher rep sets. Whereas when you're doing a rest pause, you're able to keep lower reps, which means you're a little more focused, getting a little closer to the target RIR, et cetera, et cetera. But generally, my view is that actually, maybe we should go back and clarify for the audience what the actual question was. The question was, if you take your first set to failure and that means that your other sets are also to failure, but you lose reps because you took your first set to failure, is that even bad? Because it seems like the general recommendation is to only take your last set to failure, because if you do your first set at 2 RIR or 1 RIR, then you'll perform better on the other sets. So think of it as like you take your 10 rep max and you do 3 sets of 8, or you take your 10 rep max and you get 10, 6, 5, or to call it 10, 7, 5. And so in one of them, you're getting 22 total reps, and the other one, you're getting 24 total reps. So one might look at that and say that the 3 sets of 8 is better. You held off earlier so that you could perform better across all the total sets. Whereas the question asker was putting forth this idea that should it really matter, because all of the reps that you're doing on all of those 3 sets are effective. You're essentially getting like 15 effective reps, all of the reps close to failure you're getting. Whereas in the other example, you're not actually getting as many of those reps that are close to failure. So is that worth the additional fatigue and the slightly lower performance to get more of these kind of?
And so like my takeaway was basically they were, so what I got out of it was they said that it didn't matter, but the biggest thing was like, you just don't want like the reps to drop off like a ton to where then it's like you're getting like 2 reps or 3 reps or something on later sets, correct? Is that kind of
Yeah,
what
as long as you're in the hypertrophy range, it really shouldn't matter and it should wash out. I feel like my view is it's almost better to go to failure every set. Because if you're in a 1-to-1 sense and you're like, I have 3 sets for this muscle group, then doing all 3 sets to failure has to be better than only doing 1 of the sets to failure and 2 not to failure. I think where things get complicated and what they brought up in the podcast as well is that if you're doing another exercise for that muscle group, then now there's the consideration of the fatigue that you're carrying into the next movement and whether that matters. And so that conversation becomes more interesting. So if you hold back on the first exercise and maybe only take the last set to failure, so you have 2 sets that weren't to failure, does that then allow you to better and get a better stimulus on the next exercise for the same muscle group? And that's also like an interesting question that I don't know the answer to, but certainly worth thinking about.
What did they speculate on that?
I think they thought that it more or less washed out there as well. The consideration, the way that they addressed it was to discuss would it be better to go like chest movement, back movement, then chest movement so that you can perform better on your chest movement. And then they concluded that's the way that they always program, which is the way I always program too, which is that if you let the chest recover a little bit, then you're going to get better performance on the next exercise. And it was funny in my head, I was thinking like, yeah, about 15% or so improvement. And then he was like, yeah, something like 10 or 15% improvement. And I was like, oh, I love this. Me and those guys are always on the same page. But yeah, it's not like a huge drastic change. It's like maybe you get 10 reps instead of 9 or 9 instead of 7 or something like that. So it's not going to be a huge change, but I really like that structuring of workouts where you get that break of an antagonist movement in between. And I think at that point, I go back to my idea that, hey, maybe doing all 3 sets to failure and then taking that break to do back allows you to recover enough that you can still put in good work on the next movement despite the fatigue that you accumulated on the first one.
Where it's, if you did it the other way, where if you did back to back, like the same kind of muscle groups, you would almost have to hold back potentially
on the first movement. Yeah.
On the first movement, if you did it that way, which is funny that you bring that up because the way I used to, before I started working with you, was I would do it that way where I would do, if I was doing chest, I would get all those out of the way. And I think that kind of comes from the kind of RP model and kind of thought process. And I think his kind of, again, when I say him, I'm thinking more Dr. Mike Israetel. I think his rationale is you're, again, being in that fatigue state isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world from a hypertrophy perspective, because like you said here, you're getting more of those quote unquote effective reps like right off the bat. At least I think that's the thought process behind it.
Yeah, that's how I would think of it too. I guess you can almost look at the rest, pause, or drop set research for that too, where it's if you're going chest press to flies to push-ups, then maybe that's like you have to do more sets because you're getting less quality work in for each. So maybe you have to do 9 sets, like 3 sets of each. Whereas if you separated it out with a back movement in between, maybe you can get away with doing 7 or 8 sets of chest. So maybe it's like just as simple as that.
Which makes sense, because this was the other thing that I took away from it too, is essentially what I think Zach was saying too, was that like, again, when you're a little bit more fatigued, your perception of failure is you get there a lot sooner than you actually like you get to that feeling of fatigue sooner than maybe your actual like target muscle would be too. And it's that perception of fatigue that can kind of mess with you. And I think that was what he was saying with the drop set research, is that's like the big challenge. It's like these things can work, but the issue is that you're under a fatigue state. So it's like everything seems harder. So you have to it's harder to get to that point essentially. And so you have to do more like sets to make up for that. So it all I feel like that's where we're ending up and whatnot there.
Yeah, it's like shorter rest or same muscle group sequencing. You just have to do like a little bit more because of the fatigue cost that comes with it.
Which again goes back to the RP model, which I think generally speaking is more of a higher volume, like higher set kind of approach. And so that all makes sense there with all that. Yeah. And again, this comes back to what we talked about earlier, where it's like, I feel like there's just so many different ways that you can go about hypertrophy. Again, there's just a lot of tools in the toolbox, and figuring out what works best for you is the way to go. Because again, some people like that kind of, if they do all one muscle group at one time, they got pump feeling and everything like that. Cool. Super interesting. And again, to one more thing on this, again, that's how I went into initially, was I would do I would see my reps drop, right, where it was like a 10-8 type of thing. Whereas like now it seems like it's maybe a little bit more static based on kind of the programming that we do now.
Yeah, for sure. We very rarely will take all sets of an exercise to failure, like maybe in the final week of the cycle or something like that. But I definitely find value in doing like a 1 then 0 RIR thing, especially for those like short overload type movements and then adding partials in. I like that a lot. And then we also tend to do more than one exercise per muscle group. And so I think that plays into the programming approach in that if we're going to do 2 or 3 back exercises, we don't want to just take it to the house every week in part A and then have a lot less left for part B and C. Yeah, I think all of that is really interesting programming chat. And it's so interesting in how nuanced it all is and how many rabbit holes you can go down.
Again, we come back to, hey, putting in that effort and getting fairly close to failure is probably going to be your best bet from perspective. I had one other thought there that I wanted to hit on. Oh, this is what it was. Yeah, again, and I also think too, people like, oh, 0 versus 1 RIR, they think 1 RIR is easy training, but that still is pretty hard training. I feel like if 1 to 2 RIR is easy training for you, you're probably leaving a little bit more in the tank than you think you are. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, for sure. And actually that brings up another thought for me that from the podcast that they were talking about is just how much you don't need to go to failure on those really big demanding compound movements. And like in our programming, we almost never do. Like RDLs and squats almost never even go to failure. Like we'll stop a cycle at 1 RIR in a lot of cases. And yeah, I think you can just feel that. If you're training and you're doing a really hard set of like pendulum or RDL or something like that, you can just feel that 3 RIR still is super duper effective and that there's that exponential increase in subjective fatigue when you take those things to failure. So I do think one of the messages there is to save failure for the movements that you can do that without incurring a ton of systemic fatigue and let the stimulus be enough on the movements where you can.
Yeah, it's funny. You want to maybe keep a little bit in the tank on the big compound lifts. And again, still hard training, right? Keeping 2-3 reps in the tank is still, that shouldn't be easy. If it is, you're probably further away. But then again, some of these more isolated stuff, hey, you can take that to the house. What's the fatigue cost really going to be on that? And you can probably take those to the house a little bit more. So
yep.
Cool, man. Anything else on your end that you want to share with the audience or anything like that before we let you go?
No, yeah, this thing's probably coming out in a number of weeks, right?
Probably. This will probably be out, might be a little bit quicker, probably the beginning of September.
Yeah. We have new cycles starting August 26th, the new hypertrophy cycles. Yeah, if you could listen to this and want to come hang out.
Anything that you're going to be doing differently in that cycle or anything like that?
We're just taking a lot of the approach that we talked about in this episode where we're using straight sets with longer rest periods for the really big compound movements and then taking advantage of some of that short rest research closer to failure to save time, but also get like effective workouts in sequences where there's like a buy-in set and then 4 rest pause sets or something like that to get 5 sets in a matter of 3 or 4 minutes. Just save time, get effective training in, and take advantage of the current state of the evidence-based literature.
Yeah, real quick, if you don't mind, what is that like the shorter rest period? Is it just get closer to failure, short rest, in like maybe a little bit more sets or what?
Yeah, it's really, I have a number of approaches that I do this to gamify it. Well, like a couple of them would be 1 buy-in set of 12 to 15 reps at 1 RIR or whatever, and then just rest 20 to 30 seconds after each set and accumulate 4 additional sets to 1 RIR. That would be one approach. Another one I really is complete 1 buy-in set of 10 to 12 reps and then rest a few minutes and then complete 25 reps with that weight. So you would expect that you would get like a big chunk of 10 to 12 to start, and then you would rest 20 to 30 seconds between sets and get 3 to 5 mini sets. So it might take you 4 or 5 sets to get to 25. It's actually an old one from John Meadows. So I stole that one from him a number of years ago he called it that there's something along those lines. So we'll do things like that. I also enjoy drop set sequences. So same thing, like small muscle group movements. Something like the run the rack on the lateral raises is always a classic, or kind of the same idea on any movement, really. You can do bicep curls with endless drop sets, tricep extension, easy bar, cables, do a set of push downs, and then just knock 10 pounds off the stack each time and just go to failure or close to. Those type of stuff. So small movements, low fatigue, and just been able to get like an incredible stimulus in a short amount of time.
Yeah. Do you feel like you lean a little bit more on like drop sets and myo rep type stuff in your hypertrophy programming now at this point, or is that something that's always been a staple for you?
Yeah, I always use drop sets to some capacity. I think they had a poor showing in the research in like the mid 2000 teens where like everyone was down on drop sets and short rest in general. Everything was like long rest, straight sets. And so I veered towards not programming them as much during that time. But as soon as the research began to validate it again, I was starting to incorporate it because I always felt like from a bro perspective, it just felt effective. And hey, the bros, they know what they're doing, man. I now look at things like I'm not a massive proponent of effective reps being the way, but I do think it makes sense as a general heuristic to think about the fact that the closer you are to failure, the more effective reps you get, and that doing a short rest sequence is still it's going to get you a bunch of effective reps. And even if they're less effective than they would be if you did it as a straight set, you just compensate by doing extra sets. Like it makes sense. So I don't doubt that it's actually effective because it feels that way as well.
And you can pack it in a shorter amount of time. It's again, probably a little bit, again, you don't have to rest as long and you can, like you said, you can pack it in. But the big thing is, like we talked about, your fatigue's there. So you got to push yourself on those sets and maybe get a little bit closer to failure than what you think there, which can be effective for some people. And some people, I feel like they may leave a little bit too much in the tank. So I think it really just depends on the person. Cool. Bryan, anything else that you want to leave the audience with or anything like that before we let you go?
Nope. All good, man. Good talking.
Cool. Yeah. Always a good chat with you, man. And yep, we'll talk to you next time.